Hello, world. You are listening to episode 3 of Phase Cancellation. I am Mitchell Payne, known as Ohm The Protector.
I'm Jason. I go by Jorts these days.
Actually, according to your Twitter, you're now known as Jorts, formerly not a rhythm game musician.
Yeah. Double negatives are pretty swell, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, very. So why don't you tell us about that? I mean, yeah, you are now literally you are. Yeah, you are a rhythm game musician now. How has that
See,
experience been? How was the release?
it's gotten you. That makes it worth it.
Yeah.
So, if you've been following the show, you will have heard about Club Fantastic, which is a dance rhythm game aimed at the DDR and ITG community. It's a game which brings to the table original tracks, which have been commissioned completely from scratch by musicians in the community to avoid issues with like copyright claim and takedowns on Twitch and YouTube. All of the steps have been programmed by prominent step artists in the community, and all of the artwork was also commissioned from artists with online presences and other members of the community. So that came out on June 4th and has received a lot of acclaim since, much like the first season. I've got 2 songs in season 2, which one of them is kind of like a fan favorite because it's a remix of one of the songs from season 1, the Bossy Speedy mix. And then the other one is Singularity, which was stepped by Warp Drive. Shoutouts to Warp Drive for being just a legend. And making Singularity expert difficulty just like waking hell for people who have played it.
Yeah. I mean, I was able to watch a video of a Twitch streamer who was playing. Well, at least it was the Speedy remix. Yeah, and even just kind of watching them just try and like step on those little things. It's like, and again, like making a quick Beat Saber comparison. Like I love to flail a lot. Like I get my arms into it, but like very professional, very high level players are play a lot more with their wrists, just because you can get from one location to another much faster without flailing your entire body and tiring yourself out. So seeing like very good players, just making those like small steps, being able to just get from one button to the next very quickly. Something is definitely necessary, especially, just listening to your music and how fast paced it gets. And then the amount of steps that they have, just per second, just running. Absolutely incredible that human beings can even do it. It's very cool. Very cool to see.
Yeah, the top level of like ITG and DDR tech play like basically relies on minimizing physical motion and just like hitting the steps with the smallest amount of movement possible just to conserve energy, right? And like Demo, who has the VOD up on YouTube of the Speedy mix, he's like a top level player, so he makes it look like super super easy.
Right, yeah.
I've got a dance pad and I'm playing through some of the songs myself, but I'm on, the much much lower difficulties at this point still.
Yeah, how far have you been able to get? You got high scores on the leaderboards yet?
No, 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 no. I've been playing mostly in the neighborhood of like 5, 6s, 7s, which are kind of like I guess middle of the road sort of. I guess the numbers by themselves don't really mean much, but yeah, I've been kind of on the road of like improvement, I suppose you could say, from having started a couple months ago. What'll be really exciting since like, things are starting to reopen and society is, beginning again, is eventually getting up to an arcade and playing, the real deal, like going and actually playing on a physical DDR machine.
Right. Yeah, is Club Fantastic gonna be available in types of arcades? Like, is that a thing?
No, no. Club
Ah,
Fantastic is yeah, it's kind of strictly like a home release sort of thing. I mean,
gotcha.
you could in theory like put it on an arcade cabinet and, deploy it in an actual arcade, but it's yeah, probably not going to happen.
Hmm. And so the actual Twitch stream, I was able to attend that, and I think it was right about when your mix was starting that it peaked over 100 people. What was that? Because I saw you in the chat just kind of, hanging out. Like, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so the nice thing about the live event was all of the sets were like pre-recorded. I had finished all the music track for my set and all the visuals as well. Did my own visuals for like the first time ever. And so that was already like pre-rendered, printed out. And the guy who was running the stream was basically just playing back the videos, right? And so I got to spend my time focusing instead of, focusing on mixing tunes and working that whole thing. I
Right.
got to focus on, engagement and kind of, hanging out in chat and getting reactions and stuff like that. Oh, and it was just crazy. It's like as soon as the previous mix had finished and we were in kind of like a 2 or 3 minute like intermission, like people just started chanting in all caps in Twitch chat, like Jorts, Jorts, Jorts. That was kind of hilarious, I
Yeah,
guess
just
you could say.
all the emotes and, like, even the way the stream was set up, like, I think when you put, like, an emote in the chat, like, the emote would, like, go on the screen. Like, it kind of had this way of, like, just, like, fluttering over, it would, like, duplicate the emote a bunch of times. So, yeah, I
Oh
mean, just,
yeah,
like,
well,
the screen was getting all populated with people just kind of screaming violently in Twitch chat.
one of the guys on the project, just like I don't know, the night before, like implemented like Conway's Game of Life, but with Twitch emotes. So
Oh,
what
is
would
that what
happen
that
is,
was?
so the if someone put an emote in chat, then it would start off as like a glider or something and just start, going across the screen and basically, yeah, it was just an implementation of the Game of Life and it was hilarious. Like I was in a call with some other friends while the stream was going and they're like they're like trying to figure out like how it's working and what's going on and they're putting emotes in there like Minecraft Steve and like crazy stuff like that and like trying to figure out how it's working and why it was the way that it was, but it was hilarious.
There's an intense music mix going on. The programmers are thinking about Conway's Game of Life.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, it was a super fun time. And I'm still holding you to it. I want you to upload your mix because I know that other people have uploaded your mix and you're like, "Oh, I'll get to it." I want you to do it. Upload it.
Yeah, right now it's an unlisted YouTube upload. I will I will get around to it. um what was kind of interesting about the event is that it was originally sort of conceived as like a one-time thing where it was like um no, there wouldn't be a VOD or anything like that. Part of that was, sort of as a countermeasure against getting like copyright struck by Twitch or anything like that. But it sort of turned into this like idea of like purposeful um like transientness where it was like, okay, if you were there, then you experienced it and you would only experience it once. And if you weren't there, then you would never get to see it ever again. But
Ah,
then after the fact, a lot of the musicians started uploading their sets to like SoundCloud and YouTube and stuff like that. So
hmm.
I'll I'll probably do the same just
Okay.
because the set was so well received and to try and squeeze a little bit of engagement out of my YouTube channel, which is something else that I want to work on.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, I wouldn't wanna peer pressure you as hard now because you've got that extra layer of kind of the kind of metaphorical, um, nature of the release, which, like, I'm totally on board with that. I love getting super, kind of like second tier thinking just about, basic musical stuff. Like at the end of the day, it's music, but there's kind of all these extra things that we do when we think about it. Um, cause yeah, cause I'm just in the mentality right now of just uploading, uploading, uploading. Cause after I spent, such a long time just not doing anything at all, like, just, running around with works in progress in a massive folder, not actually getting anything done. Like, something when it just snapped in my brain, I just started uploading, like, I'm going super hard on it now.
Yeah,
Even
it's time
something
to
like
publish.
yeah. Even just like something that's like 18 minutes. I took one of my favorite works in progress and I just obliterated like the last 30 seconds of it with a convolver and stretched it out to be like 6 times slower than it normally is. And then to deal with all the pitching issues, just run it through a pink noise convolver. I was like, yeah, this is
Ooh.
18 minutes and this is really cool. And I'm just going to upload it for no reason. And I think that mentality of just putting stuff out there and just keeping the ball rolling. I'm really hype on that right now. Like spread it, spread the love, spread the music, man.
Did you use Paul Stretch?
That was when I kind of learned about it in Audacity. And I remember even after I switched to because I used to mess around with Audacity when I was like 7. There's actually a hidden YouTube recording if the lucky few out there can find it of me. Uh, I essentially just did an improv play where I was a high pitched squeaky person and then like a low voice deep like evil villain, and they were like talking to each other, and it's like 20 minutes long. And that was like my first like, wow, audio is kind of cool. Like I can just do stuff with my voice. And I think that's even kind of translated to my modern improviness with a lot of my tracks. But yeah, so there is no like Paul Stretch VST, like, I kinda looked for
No.
one, but it just didn't
Yeah.
really go well. But in FL Studio, yeah, you can just drag like, when you have a sample, you just twist the knob that multiplies it, and then you can even just, render that and then do it again. So I made the thing yeah, that was, like, originally 20 seconds into, like, 18 minutes, and then a convolver, which is normally for reverb, you just have that some one shot that plays in like a church, and then they record the response to that one shot, and they can translate that to being reverb instead of kind of simulating it through something like Valhalla Room or whatever. Um, if you just load a pink noise sample into that instead as kind of the quote unquote response to the one shot, then everything that gets pushed through it kind of gets metamorphed into this pink noise, and it sounds like reverb, but it's not. It just kind of washes everything out. So normally when you try to maintain the pitch on something after stretching it, you get that like tinny, angry noise, which is super painful on your ears. But if you just throw it through pink noise and just soften it out, make it all smooth, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. So
Mm,
I'm essentially doing Paul stretching just a little bit more manually instead of going into Audacity and just clicking a few
I
buttons.
see. Yeah, I have no idea how Paul Stretch is implemented, but I would suspect that however it works is um something that needs to be done strictly offline. Like it can't be rendered, in real time. Maybe even just due to the nature of the fact that it's a time stretch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because I don't think you'd be able to do that, the time stretching live. Because even in something like, because I've thought about that in something like Gross Beat, another one of my favorite plugins. Like you can slow something down, but it has to reset. Like it can only hold like 4 beats at a time before it has to cycle back. Like you can't have Gross Beat doing a 4 bar pattern. It has to keep cycling. So you can pick different patterns, but it can't hold on to information for that long. And so for something like Paul Stretch to work in real time would require you holding on to a ton of information for a very long time. And I'm
Yeah.
guessing that's probably just not a good idea. But I've never tried
You'd
making a VST, so I don't know.
you'd probably need to just like take the entire sample that you're applying Paul Stretch to and like just collect it into memory as you're going.
Right.
And yeah, I don't know. I mean, because like the thing about Paul Stretch is I mean, stuff all the way, maybe 3 or 4 seconds in the future depend very much on, maybe the first few milliseconds of your input, right?
Mm.
So it would kind of become basically just, yeah, a big royal pain in the ass to to deal with something like that in real time.
Yeah, because even they kinda deal with it, um, in the convolver, because you can see normally, they don't really mess with, like, the volume automation inside the convolver, and this is a Fruity, brand convolver, so I don't know what other ones look like. Um, but so in the pink noise, it starts at 0 volume, and then it kind of swells up. So when there would be a kick drum in the original mix, instead of it having it just pop in, like, it kind of swells into the kick drum before that kick drum actually hits full volume, and then it has a much longer fade out. So each specific
Mm.
moment has its own kind of rise and fall, and that really helps to smooth everything out. Um, but if you were to try to like bring back the wet and bring back some of the original into it, then the time would be super messed up. So it's very all or nothing.
Yeah, convolution is kind of funky in that way. It's sort of like, um, I I don't want to, I'm not going to try and explain it because the subject of convolution is probably above the uh well, it's well above the mathematical pedigree of this show, but to very quickly sum it up, you're basically kind of taking like one function and another function and you're sort of multiplying them together, but not directly. You're kind of like taking the second function and like sliding it backwards along the first function and doing some multiplication along the way. Um, which results in the kind of time dependence of, like how reverb tails and like you were talking about the amplitude increase on your pink noise sample, how those kind of play into the way that the end result sounds. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting topic, but it can be difficult to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it would seem that I'm correct in assuming that it's fundamentally magic. If we start talking functions, I'm out. I ain't there, chief.
Yes, sorta.
Yeah, it just works. Cause I mean, they have and, like, even little effects, like, they somehow managed to, like, get a guitar amp impulse, like, through an actual guitar amp, so you can plug a sound in, and it just makes it sound like it's being pushed through an amp. I don't Yeah, it just combines things in ways that I don't understand.
Oh, okay. So maybe that's a good point. That's a maybe slightly easier example to kind of talk through mathematically speaking.
Alright.
So, one of the well, probably the most important thing or property about convolution is that if you take two signals and you take their Fourier transforms, which means basically in a nutshell, you're looking at their frequency content rather than the signals themselves along the time domain. Multiplying the Fourier transforms, meaning multiplying the two frequency contents spectrums, we'll say in a very hand wavy way, multiplying those together is equivalent to convolving two signals and then taking that Fourier transform of the result. So to kind of apply it to the guitar example, what happens is you have your guitar signal as an input, um, and it's just like totally clean. It's just like a straight up guitar sound, and then you have an impulse response of like a cabinet, which basically means you've run an impulse or kind of like a short one shot through a speaker and enclosure, and then recorded the result of that using a microphone in front of the speaker itself. That resulting frequency response, because that's basically what it is, right? A speaker cabinet isn't going to impart any reverb or sort of time dependent things onto
Right.
onto an impulse. So it's basically just a capture of how the frequency response of the cabinet looks, respective of that input impulse. So what you're basically doing is multiplying the frequency response of that cabinet onto the frequency response of the clean guitar, and that basically applies that frequency response onto the guitar signal. So like if we think about it this way, um let's say you play a note on a guitar, and if you play a note on a guitar and you're recording, like you're going to get the fundamental obviously, and then you're going to get a whole bunch of overtones that, depending on how clean your strings are, may extend up quite far into the frequency spectrum. Like we're talking, 15,000 hertz or whatever, right? If you got like really jangly steel strings. So when you convolve the speaker cabinet, guitar speaker cabinets generally don't go too far above like 4 or 5 or 6 kilohertz. So the frequency response up there is going to be 0, right?
Right.
So what happens when you multiply some signal that's up in the 15 kilohertz range by 0 signal in the cabinet response? Well, if you multiply anything by 0, you get 0, right?
Right.
So you're basically applying kind of the shape of the frequency response of the cabinet to the shape of the frequency response of the raw guitar signal.
Hmm.
And that's like a really, despite how crazy that was and the fact that it like took 5 minutes to explain, that's one of the simpler examples. And yeah, reverb like is basically magic. I'll just like it once you start to introduce like time dependence into the equation, yeah, it gets very difficult to sort of understand, and um exceeds the scope of this talk.
Right. But I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Even because the white noise sample versus the pink noise sample, like because pink noise is much softer in those higher frequencies, anything that you run through it is going to be multiplied by a lesser amount in those higher frequencies, and so that makes the outcome sound much softer. And even one of the
Right.
impulse responses is like, someone like hit a spoon against a metal can and so everything sounds metallic because that metal
Yeah.
is going to respond in a certain way. And so if it responds to some mid-range a little bit more aggressively, then whatever you pass through it is also going to have its mid-range boosted. So,
Yeah.
huh,
So experiment with, I mean, you might have something like a convolution reverb or a guitar impulse response loader or something like that. Like use things that don't make sense. Like load up impulse responses that aren't impulse responses. Take things like synth sounds,
mm,
and convolve synth sounds with other synth sounds. The results can be just like absolutely wild, and it's really kind of fun and out of the box way to experiment.
yeah, I've even like accidentally thrown dialogue in there. And then, you're playing like your piano and then there's like weird whispery undertones in there and it gets all freaky. I think I'm gonna have to make my next 60-minute moment about convolution. Yeah, it's convoluted. That's a good name. Yeah, inspired by Jorts. So we have a interesting little topic for today's episode. This is something that we have bounced around a few times, kind of thinking to ourselves, but it's a big topic. But it's time for it. Gear, hardware, physical things that you can add to your life as a musician, and how that affects the way that you make or interpret your music. Um, so this is something that you do, uh, I think, more aggressively feels intense, but I think it's true. You have more gear and more varieties because you actually play a couple instruments, correct? Like what? How many instruments can you play?
Well, theoretically speaking, I can play any instrument, but the real question becomes what instruments can I play well?
Fair.
And well, subject to my own assessment, I guess. I'll just say I play guitar, I play bass, I play keys and keyboards and piano, and I play drums and all the sort of, things that come with that. So to sum it up in in like one sentence, that just about does it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I remember I did do band when I was in middle school, and I just played percussion, and, like, I always struggled with, like, reading notes on sheet music, like, something in my brain just could not compute. Like, I don't wanna toot my own horn, I think I'm, reasonably intelligent, but for some reason, like, sheet music just did not make sense to me. So, like, I could hit a drum at certain times, but once they asked me to, like, sit in front of, like, the xylophone, 'cause it's like percussion, but it has notes. Oh, it was tragic. It did not go well. Um so I have an MPK Mini, which has a very small keyboard on it. And because I understand how chords work, like I can put my fingers on chords and play them. So for some tracks in the past, I have done that just to get a little bit of a human touch, just the different times in which my fingers actually hit the notes. But if I were to try and like start improving or playing complex melodies, nah, it's out the window. But yeah, I guess we gotta start somewhere. So I do have that. I'll probably run through mine pretty quickly. I have uh Tile PTE D01. I'm like looking over my shoulder. And that's a drum pad that I got myself for a Christmas a while back. Just the old return to drums. And it's something I like to mess around with. I haven't actually gotten to including it in too many tracks yet because I'm surprised by how hard it is to keep a rhythm going. Because in my brain, like, I love, like, beatboxing when I'm just, like, alone, just, like, making cereal or something in the kitchen, right? And, like, that's easy because when you wanna press your lips to make a noise, you can do it right now. Like, the signal from your brain to your muscle, like, the noise comes immediately after that. But when you're hitting a drum set or a drum pad, the physical muscles, like, you have to start swinging, but the sound doesn't come right after. You actually have to complete the swing until the sound comes out. And I think something about that just makes it a little bit more difficult. Like I have to send the impulse to my foot to hit the pedal just a little bit before I actually want the sound to come out. And I think that's something that just probably takes a ton of practice and eventually you just don't even think about it anymore. But when you're starting to get into it, it's a little bit tricky. Do you have any, because I've heard about some of your other equipment, but do you have any, like, percussive equipment?
Um, I've got a drum kit that's collecting dust somewhere. I haven't given it a lot of attention lately.
Ah,
Um, Probably because I'm a lot more focused on my other instruments. I've also got some smaller percussion instruments. I've got a tambourine, which was kind of a gift or hand me down uh from someone. I've got um like one of those small egg shakers, which I use a
oh,
lot
yeah.
with in recording, and the tambourine too, because those things are easy to just sort of pick up and like you can just be sitting working on a track and be like, oh, this needs some more rhythm. And then just, reach into the drawer, grab the shaker, turn on the mic, record like a 2 bar, 4 bar loop and just have something there.
Huh. And then I guess, at least wrapping up for my end, the last thing that I have is, something that was absurdly expensive and something I didn't need to purchase. It's the Artiphone Instrument One, and I think they've even made some other things since then, but it kind of looks like a guitar. It has a fretboard, but it's because it's a MIDI controller, like, there's no physical strings, like, the instrument the object does not make sound by itself, you have to plug it into something, and this is true of all of my hardware at this point. Um, and so there's these pressure sensitive fretting plates that you can press down on to actually send different note inputs, and then all the way down, there's, like, 5 little rubber pieces? Like, they kinda stick out and they're arranged like, strings on a guitar would be. So you can actually flick these little rubber pieces, and that triggers the note. So say you're plugged into, even just a piano or a guitar sound on your software, when you hold the note for the note that you want to play, and then you flick the little piece of rubber to actually trigger that note to happen. And then there's even some, uh, forget what's the name of, like, some sort of gimbal inside something that shows, like, what direction it is. Some piece of hardware. You know what I'm talking about?
No, can't say
Like,
I do.
if I were to raise the instrument up or if I were to, like, kneel it down.
Oh, an accelerometer?
Yeah. Yeah, it's got a little accelerometer there so you can, flail the instrument around to, edit some other parameter. Um, Very highly customizable, very interesting, and very difficult to play. I did actually try playing guitar in my earlier years, and not being able to physically press a string, you're just pressing a place where a string should be, and then trying to strum several pieces of very stiff rubber. Um, it's a difficult experience, and I've seen people do very well with it, and you can change it in all different sorts of way. Even if you have an iPhone, it's iPhone only for some reason. You can use your iPhone as like a bow and play a violin. It's supposed to be this incredible thing, which I am just not capable of utilizing.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, it
that
sounds like it would be pretty disorienting if you're coming from like an actual fretted stringed instrument. Maybe
right.
if when we if we ever meet up, which hopefully we'll meet up at some point, you should bring it along. It'd be interesting to try out.
Yeah, I would love to see because you can actually play the real life equivalent of these instruments. So I would love to see how you do on it because it's always an interesting experience. I almost feel like it's like very competent guitar players struggle to play Guitar Hero because they're both quote guitars, but the ways that they work are very different and their feel is completely different. So I'm wondering how that would translate between you and the instrument. Because if I were to start learning it, I would be learning it. I would be learning guitar on that piece of equipment, so it might even be easier for me to eventually hold on to that skill. So yeah, yeah, that's the bulk of my devices. So where do you wanna start? I don't know what's the best way to approach this for you.
Jeez. That's the question, I guess.
Well, we're talking about guitars, and you've recently had a venture with that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it would make more sense to kind of go chronologically for me.
That might be good. That might be wise.
So I guess I took piano lessons when I was a kid, like in grade school. And that was sort of the first instrument I really became acquainted with. It doesn't really have any bearing on what gear I have, but it will later. Then I started playing drums and got the drum kit, which as I said is collecting dust at the moment. Then during my college years, I got interested in classical guitar, which is sort of well, it's what it sounds like. It's kind of the old way that guitars used to be before the modern guitar came about. So it's an acoustic guitar. It has nylon strings, which are traditionally made of gut, and the strings are spaced considerably further apart than they would be on a modern acoustic or electric guitar because you play the strings with your fingers independently, kind of like finger style. You're using all the fingers on your hand except for your pinky
Huh.
most of the time. And so that kind of gives you almost like a sort of like a more portable and compact and sort of slightly more limited version of like a piano from like an instrumentation perspective because you can still hit chords and quite intricate melodies. So it's a lot of fun. It's very much a campfire instrument for me, so I so
Hmm.
I pick it up and play it every now and again. And then shortly thereafter I picked up bass guitar, and bass guitar, also being played with one's fingers, is kind of similar to classical guitar in a way, I suppose. I picked up my first bass in maybe 2018 or so, and then picked up another one in 2019. So I've got two bass guitars. One's um, a Fender Jazz bass, and then the other is a Fender Precision bass. So they're similar, but they're kind of outfitted for different things. The Precision bass is kind of my kind of old school sound. Like it's got like tape wound strings, and it's kind of more outfitted for kind of like, I don't know, Motown or like funk and soul,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. And then the jazz bass is very much like hot rodded for like rock music, active pickups, uh, you know, big strings, big bridge, that sort of thing. After that, I started playing electric guitar much more recently, like within the last 2 years. And it kind of maybe followed as a natural conclusion of having both classical guitar and bass. So I picked up a Fender Strat a couple years ago, and then just last weekend, as of the time of recording, I went to visit Sweetwater's store in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and brought home a Schecter PT Pro, which is kind of fills a hole in my stringed instrument lineup as far as kind of like a more hard rock or like heavy metal sort of oriented sound. Definitely sounds really great on recordings, which I've already been putting it to some use.
Yeah, I've gotten a little sneak peek of it, and definitely, I mean, it's surprising how well you can just like, I don't know what your process is like, but for me, I feel like it'd be insanely difficult to try and really record a live instrument and then seamlessly get it into a mix. But so far, I mean, from what I've heard, you've definitely been able to pull it off pretty seamlessly, at least from my view.
Thank you. Oh, I forgot to mention one instrument, which is kind of an oddball, which is a Squire Bass 6, which is how to describe it. It came about in like the 60s, basically as it's a six-string bass, but it's tuned like a guitar, just one octave down.
Mm.
So like a bass, normally speaking, is basically the four lowest strings on a guitar, but down an octave. But when you normally think like five string bass or six string bass, like that generally starts with adding strings under the low E string. But what this one does is it strings it up like a guitar. And so it kind of sits at a scale length, which is in between a guitar and a bass at 30 inches. And so the way that I've kind of got it strung up and modded a little bit is as like a baritone guitar, in the sense that I'm kind of playing it as if it's a guitar, but it's an octave lower, which kind of makes it sound as if it's like the bottom six strings of an eight string guitar, which if you've ever seen or heard an eight string guitar is like, holy cow, it's like having a four string bass under your guitar strings. So it's kind of crazy, but if you run it through like, a nice high gain amp or amp sim, you get like these crazy chunky, genty, like heavy metal tones. So it's pretty slick. I haven't really put it to much use yet, but it would be fun to start using it in some projects soon.
Yeah, because I feel like it's getting to the point where you could almost pull off an entire, like, one-man band, like, recording all of these different elements and then putting them together. I mean, it wouldn't quite be in the style that we're familiar with, but, I mean, you have all the elements and you're proficient enough to use them. I don't know.
I've I've got I've got some ideas for kind of like a one man band project, and um it's still ideas at this point, so I don't want to say too much, but it would be very fun to sort of do like a one man like hard rock or like alternative metal sort of outfit, especially with that low tuned baritone guitar sort of deal. Like just like the range of possibility with that thing would be wild.
Right. I'm ready for Jorts metal. You gotta do, like, the you gotta do the screamy metal thing. I mean, maybe, singing, traditionally may not be it, but, like, come on. That'd be super cool.
I don't know. Well, we'll see what happens.
We'll see. TBD. And then, so you also, and this is a question that's kind of bringing my head, right? Before we go like too deep into the conversation, like you have like pedals, right? For these various guitars.
Yeah. So built a pedal board like last summer in the midst of pandemic boredom, basically because I could, and not for much more reason than that. Yeah, I threw together. It's a pretty simple pedal board. It's just like a tuner pedal, a Keeley compressor, like a Boss overdrive, a Nano Clone chorus pedal, an MXR Phase 90 phaser, and a Fender Marine Layer reverb. And those are, I mean, broadly speaking, those are just hardware implementations of things that you're probably familiar with as, as a computer musician, right? A lot of these effects like phasers and reverbs and chorus and that sort of stuff we're already familiar with. So I do use the pedal board with guitar, but I have also been experimenting lately with using the pedal board with synths and doing things like running my synths through the pedals to kind of pick up like the kind of analog electronics and like little circuitry imperfections like noise and clipping and kind of playing with that in sort of an avant-garde way.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Like, what is that specific draw of using pedals when, like you said, there's software mimicry that we can essentially do. And so, like, so is there like audible enough analog circuitry, kind of as you were saying, enough that like it impacts the way that you hear those things?
um to some degree, yeah. I mean, what I've basically been doing is taking stuff um and I'm largely inspired by like Mick Gordon's work on the Doom soundtrack, where he just basically would take sine waves and like run them through just like a monstrous array of like distortions and compressors and all sorts of stuff and just get like all sorts of little crispy bits just from like, noise and like compression artifacts and just like analog goodness and just like compress the bollocks out of it so it's just like huge sounding. And I'm sort of kind of, working towards that sort of idea with a fully analog signal chain as well.
Hmm.
Just
And
like take the output of the pedal board and like slap like 5 OTTs on it, you know.
yeah, I mean, when I'm thinking of a pedal board, I'm already thinking highly compressed and distorted. I mean, this is just my view of not actually having ever used one. So just adding additional compression and distortion. Yeah, I'm waiting until what is it like Data Life? That's who made Sausage Fattener. Waiting for the release of the official Sausage Fattener pedal. That'll be a big
Oh
day for the
geez.
world.
That would be legendary.
And then you
So
also have
maybe
some. No, go ahead.
I think we're going to the same place. I think I was gonna say that kind of segues nicely into the synth collection.
Yes. Yep.
So my first synth was and or is I still have it and very much love it, is an Alesis Ion, which is a virtual analog synth from like the early 2000s, I want to say.
I'm gonna
And
stop you right there real quick because I'm having trouble reconciling these words. What is a virtual analog? Like, aren't those kind of disagreeing terms, or am I misinterpreting?
so the synth has a microprocessor and it generates sound using the microprocessor, but basically by emulating wave forms which have been captured from actual analog gear. So if you think about software synths like Diva or Monarch by Native Instruments, or uh, I don't know. Well, FL Studio has a virtual analog, right? I think it's like Wasp or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. It's a bit of an older plugin I haven't messed with too much, but yeah, there's a couple in there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple I think. But anyway, yeah, the basic idea is that you're kind of emulating analog oscillators and filters with digital hardware.
Gotcha.
So the benefit of it being a fully digital synth means you have not only full control over tuning, which is something that tends to go bad with analog oscillators over time, and you can actually adjust the amount of analog drift, is what they call it.
Hmm.
So you can kind of like artificially age the oscillators in the synth to get like that kind of, vapor wavy or like synth wavy sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so there's three oscillator shapes, one that lets you morph between sine and saw, another that lets you morph between triangle and pulse, and then some I'm sorry, one that morphs between triangle and saw, one that morphs between sine and, well, it's just a sine, but the morph kind of like um it's almost like a bend in like serum.
Oh,
You know
okay.
how it kind of like shapes the waveform differently.
Right.
And then one which is a square wave, which lets you adjust the pulse width. And so you have three oscillators, and you have a noise oscillator, and you have the ability to FM the oscillators with each other, albeit in a
Mm.
limited fashion. It's not really an FM synth. It also has an arpeggiator. It has two filters, and each filter has many, many modes, which emulate Oberheims, Moogs, like 303s, like just all sorts of different filter modes. Envelope generators, like there's like this synth can do anything that any analog synth could do, basically. And it's just absolutely wicked. And it has like one of the nicest mod matrices that I've ever mod matrices, modulation matrices that I've ever seen on a synth that isn't like, software based.
Right.
So you can take, one of your mod wheels and assign it to a filter via an LFO to get kind of like a wobble effect. You can do the same with like the pitch to get, a vibrato. Um, yeah, you can assign envelopes to different things. It's just crazy what you can do with it. And it's a lot of fun to program because the whole face of the synth is just covered in rotary encoders, which like the synth that just beckons you to reach out and grab and like tweak in real time as you're playing it, which is just an awesome thing.
Yeah, there definitely is just a kind of like small, subtle, strange satisfaction with like physically turning knobs and like hearing a sound change as a response to that. Like, cause like clicking is cool, clicking a little PNG of a knob is whatever, but actually turning it, there's something there. There's
Yeah.
a little something there,
It's like a primal instinct or something. It's just, yeah, knobs on synths, dude.
right?
So then the next one in the collection is the Casio HT3000, which is completely the opposite. It was made in the late 80s or early 90s, and as such was the trend with digital synthesizers of the age. It's covered in buttons and like one knob for data entry, which isn't even an encoder. So it has like a start and an end point.
Oh,
And all of the programming is done by first using the knob to select a parameter and then pressing a button to go into that parameter and then using the knob to adjust the value of that parameter. So such parameters would include things like the attack time on an envelope, the release time on an envelope, the oscillator shape and use, the filter cutoff and resonance, the effects that are in use. I mean, like programming that thing is very much more time consuming, but its sounds are kind of more like late 80s like film score sort of deal.
oh yeah.
Like it's got this definite like retro, 80s synth sort of feel. So it almost does like the sort of synthwave sounds as well or maybe even better than the Ion.
Do you use these synths often in your own music? Like, when is the time that you, like, think to yourself, like, "I wanna use the synth?"
Um usually it'll be things like leads or sometimes pads. I don't not often for basses, just because like I feel like you can get more control um over bass sounds with software, and bass sounds like need a lot of control in
Yeah,
my
they're very
opinion, or in
sensitive.
my
Yeah.
yeah. Um but yeah, I mean it depends on the synth. So let me let me wrap up the collection and then maybe you can ask me that again. But well, to go so far, the Ion as a virtual analog is great for things like leads and pads and basses and just like, analog sounds in general. The HT3000 as sort of like an 80s synth is much more suited to like pads and bell sounds and that sort of thing. Um, Next on the list is a Kurzweil K2VX, which is like, oh my god. So this synth, um, I found on Craigslist, and it was at like this pawn shop in in like Waterford or something, right?
Interesting.
And I'm like, okay, this thing looks pretty cool. And I like did some more research. Well, they had it listed as so like the logo on the front face is kind of weird. The model name is K2VX, but they kind of wrote it on the face as like K2 um I don't remember even exactly how they wrote it, but it was like the logo is weird, so it's hard to interpret. But anyway, they did it wrong on Craigslist, right? And for all intents and purposes, they probably like just misread it entirely. And when they were trying to appraise it, very likely couldn't find very much on it and had to go on similar models.
Right.
Well, I did some research of my own and found the K2VX, and it's like this crazy, like almost like a deluxe edition of like the K2000, which was another synth in the series. It's like this, it's sort of like a PCM synth, which I guess in today's lingo would kind of be called like a synth sampler.
Mm.
In that it has a bunch of stored sounds. But then it also has like a synthesis engine inside it. So it can do like it can generate waveforms, but it also has like a whole bunch of recorded sounds as well. Things like strings and pianos and like, actual acoustic instruments. Um, and so the programming, which is like crazy deep, and I haven't even really scratched the surface with it, is it lets you kind of combine different synthesis methods in different ways. And it's like super powerful. And the thing is like wild. Like it's got a built-in sequencer. It's got a freaking like floppy disk on it. It's got,
What?
I think, probably an internal hard drive. It's got a freaking fan on the bottom to blow heat away from it
So it's a
because
computer.
yeah, it's like a powerful device, right? I think it's got like a SCSI output or something. Like it's wild. So I show up and I offer to pay in cash, and they're like, "All right, well, if you're paying in cash, we can do like I think it was like 350." And I was like, "All right, yep." I don't think they knew how much it was worth because I would imagine that at the time it probably would have gone for like I don't know, maybe 500 or maybe even 600. I don't know.
Wow.
So I feel like I got it for a pretty good deal.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
I actually I need to pry it open and do some repair work. Um because one of the DSP chips for the effects is kind of fried and it sounds nasty, but it's just like this tiny little memory chip that just needs to be replaced.
Good luck with that. One of my Oculus Rift controllers broke and I pried it open. I ended up canceling the project. I'm just gonna buy a new one. At least, I mean, at least like modern electronics, like they're so small and so delicate that repairs feel ridiculous. But I don't know what the
Oh,
size concerns on yours are.
this thing's like this one's really simple. It's like you open it up and it's not even like soldered to a board. It's sitting in a socket. So all I need to
Oh,
do is just like reach in, yank it out, and replace it with a new one.
you're still able to buy like replacements parts for that kind of thing?
That's research that I have to do.
Ah,
Cause it's this like, I don't know, 2 kilobyte memory chip from, like the mid 2000s or something. And, memory is like one of the fastest advancing, you know, computer components. So it's like,
right. They wouldn't
it's
just keep producing them because there's
no, it's
no
like
demand for them anymore.
who the hell is gonna need a 2 kilobyte RAM chip? Like when you could get like, I don't know, probably a gigabyte in the same form factor.
Right.
Right. Anyway, um, yeah. So to round out the collection, the last synth was something I picked up last year, which is a Roland XV 2020, which is the only synth in my collection which is not a keyboard. And it's a little desktop unit. It's kind of like a miniature version of other members of the XV series, which are, I guess you could kind of describe them as like a PCM synth, um, or like a rompler, essentially. So, um, they're called romplers because all of the sound data is stored on read-only memory.
Right.
Um, and they're basically just like preset machines. Um, they're not strictly preset machines. Like you can actually dive in and do editing, but the the kind of marketing and engineering of the time um resulted in these things shipping with like upwards of 1,000 presets built in.
It's a lot of presets.
So they're yeah, so people would basically buy them and use them for what you would call bread and butter sounds,
Yeah.
which are kind of like, your stock sounding pianos or synth pads or basses or orchestra hits and strings and that sort of thing. It's 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 sort of like between what you might get with like a general MIDI library and like, a contact library,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
it has it was made in like 2000 or 2001, so it has a definite like late 90s early 2000s flavor to the sounds, which I like. It's reminiscent of like early rave music, so
Yeah.
uh I like it.
Yeah, I mean, even, there was some preset bank that I remember using a while ago, and it had, like a little, like, a dubstep library, and even just for the time that those presets were made, like, we're talking, like, older dubstep, like, I'm going in there like, "Oh, they got some, like, rhythm wobbles in here or something," and no, like, it's just, like, squeaky, like, aggressive, basses or just, like, very, super wide and, like, punchy, beats that are, like, super full, and it's just interesting to see how, like, presets of the time really capture, kind of an electronic era very well.
Yeah, well, dubstep presets age like milk in 90-degree weather.
Yeah, like a dance lead will always just be a dance lead, like, our hyper saws, like, you can just always use them, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, dubstep presets are in and out pretty quick.
Yeah, compare a dubstep bass in 2009 to a dubstep bass in 2011 to a dubstep bass in 2014 to a dubstep bass in 2018 to a dubstep bass today, and like you're getting a different answer each time.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of silly.
So is that your entire collection? Is that's the whole thing?
Yeah, it pretty much does it for like sound producing gear. Aside
Hmm.
from that, I've got like a couple of MIDI controllers which are barely worth mentioning, and then a Shure SM7B microphone, which I'm speaking into at this very moment, which runs into a Motu M4 audio interface. And that's about it for my music making gear.
And then I forget, are you a headphone producer or a speakers producer?
I have I have basically transitioned to being fully headphone. Um with the caveat that when I'm doing mixes and stuff like that, I try to listen to mixes on as many systems as I can. I take it out to my car. I play it through like crappy Bluetooth speakers and crappy earbuds and like boom boxes and all sorts of things just to capture, more uh, opinions on my mixes.
Right.
But yeah, my setup kind of prohibits the use of um like studio monitors right now, mostly because of space.
Yeah, I even have some I have some, like, listening speakers, and I remember, when I first kinda moved into my current room here, I tried handing, or, like, putting a sound foam all over the wall, and I still have it, but it kind of just fell off over the course of, like, a week because my room would get so hot and muggy that I think, like, the command strips that I was given just were not gonna cut it. So, like, there's still a couple random bass traps in the corner, but, otherwise everything is falling off. So, yeah, I've been producing on headphones my, entire existence, and I have come into the trap with that, um because they always warn about, phase cancellation problems, podcast name, where I would, like, just widen a sub bass, like, why not? It sounds cool when I'm wearing headphones,
Oh
and even,
no.
like, I've gotten caught even, like, recently, like, I just had this habit of even on my master 'cause there's, 3 bands, and so I'd go to my high frequency band, and I'm like, "Wow, if I just turn this separator up, it just sounds cool." And then I would go and listen to it on my Amazon Echo speaker, and, like, even my cymbals were, like, suffering from phase cancellation problems, or I'd put, like, a little chorus on them, and it just very bad. So, yeah, I'm starting to do m more of yeah, and, like, I think a lot of people wouldn't notice, they'd just be like, "Oh, that's an interesting sound for a cymbal." But anyone who's, kind of experienced in that problem would be able to call it out pretty quickly. So I'm starting to try and do a little bit more of that, especially even just throwing things in mono for a few seconds and making sure that you haven't accidentally obliterated some part of your mix. Um but in terms of hardware, I still think there are, like, two kinda things I wanna mention. One, which I think how many monitors do you have?
Computer monitors?
Yeah,
3.
3? Okay, so you're also 3. Yeah, having more than 1 monitor, I think is super I mean, almost essential. I don't wanna say completely essential. When I started, I was on a laptop with, like, a single screen, and I know there are literal laptop producers who do very well. But I think in a lot of, like, creative applications, because there's so many windows, in software, that being able to spread them out a little bit, I have my kind of sequencer and just plugins in my center screen, piano roll on the right, playlist and mixer on the left. Being able to jump quickly between those things, is super useful. So I think most people stop at 2 monitors, but I don't know, I don't think I'd be able to have any less than 3 now. And then also, I have a 3D printer, um, something that I've gotten I mean, I've just been super into since I got it. I remember just going to Micro Center one day, just looking around, and I was like, "Oh, y'all got 3D printers?" And just, like, watching one print for, like, an hour straight, just doing the demo print just, like, 3 times. Um, and yeah, I took one home that night and ever since, when I did my little rebranding for Ohm the Protector, I came up with that, cute little symbol that I've been using everywhere, and so I actually ended up and just printed, like, a small figurine version of that, and I also designed, like, a super edgy looking, like, mask that I could wear with, like, the symbol on top and everything, and so having those things obviously doesn't impact the music directly or anything, um, but, you and I both know that there's also a lot of like visuals that do have to come into music eventually, if you're gonna make album art. Um, and you, I think, have really narrowed down like a style, when you're making album art, you've got these visuals with these kind of like glitchy effects and these characters. You did all the visual work for phase cancellation. I've never been able to quite hone in on something as clean and refined as that. Um, so just being able to take pictures of a 3D print and then just applying some effects to it and throwing some text next to it, I've actually found to be pretty rewarding. So I think it's like the my hidden little secret for the aesthetics now is having a little 3D printed figurine. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into making music. It's a pretty big thing.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's nice to have gear and stuff. Of course, you know, a million people have said it before. It's not necessary to have lots of expensive gear to make good music, but sometimes it can help with, you know, getting a particular sound that you're going for, or, you know, going for early 2000s rave or 80s synth wave, or, you know, getting a hard rock or heavy metal sound without having to resort to a contact library. Like all those sorts of things can contribute to, you know, building a small collection if you're doing a lot of recording. But, you know, it's not to say that you can't make good music 100% in the box.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, even my little MIDI controllers have been nice for just kind of breaking out of, you know, writer's block almost. I don't know if there's like a music producer's block or something. Um, but just being able to even just like fiddle around a couple of extra notes and trying different presets and being able to jump through things can be nice. But I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, if it's still going into a computer, I mean, modern computers are really good at simulating uh, actual sounds, and so much of electronic music obviously is not quote unquote actual sounds from the real world anymore. So yeah, yeah, I wouldn't want anyone to ever feel like, oh, unless I can buy the cool $600 thing, I'm not going to be able to make music. No, it's stuff to augment it, but doesn't have to define it.
Mhm.
So I think without too much else to go on. Real quick, I do want to say, as of like 20 minutes ago, my 60-minute moments series one is live on Spotify now, and like Apple Music if you're an
Oh,
Apple
let's
user.
go.
Yeah, so hit me with those follows. Means a lot. Makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, or not. Like that's cool. Like it's your choice. Of course, links will be in the description to where you can find us on our various platforms. Make sure to check out Jorts and click on his YouTube every single day until he eventually gives into the peer pressure and uploads his mix. Uh,
Yep.
and I think that'll do it for Phase Cancellation Episode 3. I have been Ohm The Protector,
And it's shorts.
and we will see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for listening.